This is Lecture 1 of Communication Disorders and Sciences 446. Lecture 1 is an overview of principles and issues in oral rehabilitation and will span 4 individual screencasts, each approximately 15 minutes, probably a little less. And you have an accompanying set of PowerPoint slides in PDF format for you to watch along. So the slides that you have are the slides that will be in the screencast, with the exception of my voice over the screencast here. Audiology is literally the study of hearing. Take those two words apart. Ology, oligo, study, audio to hear. So study of hearing. In audiology, there's 2 main areas of activity. Primarily, one primary activity is diagnostics, literally audiometry. It's the measurement of hearing, and that was a class that you already had, which was CD445. This class is the second of those of your audiology classes, so to speak, and this is a class that focuses on the intervention aspects of audiology, what we could otherwise call the rehabilitation or habilitation features of audiology. Essentially, what do we do to help persons who have hearing loss? As you might have noticed in a couple of the articles that were available to you, particularly articles that referenced or quoted Mark Ross, you'll note that the discipline of audiology began with rehabilitative services. Clark et al. Mentions this as well. And the idea is that in post-World War II America, where there were millions of returning service personnel, many of whom had service-incurred or service-induced hearing loss, it was the government's responsibility, in fact promise, to provide rehabilitative care for our returning service personnel. It still is to this day. So the large influx of returning service personnel forced the government to set up programs to optimize persons with hearing loss. And sort of many people, Mark Ross, John Grier Clark included, tie the beginning of audiology as a distinct discipline to that specific time period. These 2 particular areas of activity share a couple of core philosophies, as well as does other aspects of healthcare, as well as speech-language pathology, arguably. And that's to say, both share the philosophies of prevention. In audiology and in hearing, we refer to that as hearing conservation, the notion that prevention is the best rehabilitation. And so it certainly is part of our standards and scope of practices and part of the certification goals for individuals who are becoming speech pathologists or audiologists to learn all about preventative measures. In this case, this would be hearing conservation. The second core philosophy that sort of imbues both diagnostics and rehabilitation is the idea of early intervention. And obviously, early intervention follows early identification, so those kind of go hand in glove. Again, not something that is a fundamentally just an audiology thing or just a speech pathology thing, but certainly the general axiom it would be that the earlier that you can identify a problem, the more likely the prognosis will be more favorable, and the more likely that there will be more intervention choices available to that particular person. Now, who are you? I know from teaching this class in the past that it's generally a gamut of people who have different professional aspirations. Some of you, and you may not know it at the moment, but maybe you will by the time this course is over, will be an audiologist or would like to become an audiologist, in the sense that this material opens up a whole other area of intervention, a whole other area of possible career excitement for you. Working with persons with hearing loss is a different venture than working with persons with speech and language differences and disabilities, and it does have its particular attractions. So as we go through the course, you might find that some of the aspects of this course appeal to you or speak to you. That's possible, and usually is the case. I understand that many of you are prospective speech-language pathologists, and that's fine and well also. Part of your certification requirements will call for you to be knowledgeable about the effects of hearing loss on spoken language, and that's true primarily from a developmental point of view. How does hearing loss in a child affect the development of their speech and their language? And so that'll be one of the main features of this class as well. Some of you are going to be people that are going to be working with the deaf and hard of hearing populations, possibly as teachers. In fact, any of you who end up working in the school setting, whether you're an audiologist, speech pathologist, or a teacher in the schools, will undoubtedly encounter children with hearing loss and children who are wearing hearing aids and perhaps other devices, cochlear implants, and so on. So it's very likely that you're going to be intersecting the population of people who are with hearing impairment. All of us, if we live long enough, are going to be people with hearing loss. Hearing loss is an inevitability of long life. It just is. If you live up to the age of 70, 80, I've never tested somebody age 75 who had the hearing of a 25-year-old, and so on. So if we all live long enough, we all will have hearing loss. Many of you probably right now are persons who have older family members, if nothing else, that have hearing loss. So you might have an uncle or a grandfather, maybe one of your parents, maybe a spouse even, that has hearing loss that may be either due to aging or to damage done through occupation or work or as a military personnel. So those are all possibilities. And it's always the case that you become much more insightful and more attuned to those persons in your families who have hearing loss going through this course, and you might be helpful to them in more ways than you can anticipate at the moment. So I look forward to hearing your stories about that. Now, it may seem like a weird departure, but I always like to ask, and without you sneaking a peek anywhere, I want you to see if you can remember what the actual name of this class is. Your choices are as follows: oral rehabilitation, oral habilitation, auditory habilitation, audiologic rehabilitation, and rehabilitative audiology. Now, the reason I bring up all of these titles is that this particular course, at any given university in the United States, this exact content would have any of one of these following names. The course that I teach at another university in the Los Angeles basin is actually letter E, rehabilitative audiology. The name of the book that we're using here in this course by Scow and Nurbin is Introduction to D, Audiologic Rehabilitation. Most of the articles that you have been reading or have looked over that refer to oral rehabilitation or refer to the content of this class refer to letter A, oral rehabilitation. The fact of the matter, though, is your class is titled C, auditory habilitation. And that introduces or suggests a slight nuance that I don't think is really present in the course, at least not in the times that I've taught this particular course. But let's look at what that nuance is. Particularly, it hinges on the difference between the words rehabilitation and habilitation. Rehabilitation, the first word, is fairly straightforward. I think not too much difference in meaning here. Rehabilitation implies the restoration of something that was lost. You're rehabilitating. You're bringing something back that was lost. And most clearly, we could think of rehabilitation as being applicable to an adult model. So to an adult who had normal hearing throughout their life and now has hearing impairment now either due to aging or disease or to damage, we can say now they have an adult onset hearing loss. And therefore, any measures that we might bring to bear to help them to deal with the problems caused by their hearing impairment, we could say is rehabilitation. Now, This brings us to this other word now, this other word that's part of your course title, habilitation. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Habilitation, I always say habilitation, or I don't know how to say it even. Nonetheless, this is not really even a word that we use much in English. It implies that there's a word if we have rehabilitation, but the word has been kind of appropriated to sort of suggest the development of a skill that was never present. And in that context, then we think of it as being applicable mostly to children. So this notion of habilitation, of auditory habilitation, sort of has the impression of we're teaching children how to hear, we're teaching children how to use their auditory channel. And again, why this is the exact focus of your title of your class is probably buried in political correctness and nuance from about 40 years ago, and beyond the scope of our class at this point. Nonetheless, we'll probably refer to this class primarily by the letters AR, oral rehabilitation. It's the easiest way to kind of go through it. So what is AR? So quoting Ivory and Obvious 2014, oral rehab is the process of addressing the hearing problems and needs of a person who has problems and needs. If we look at the text, they say that the main goal of audiologic rehabilitation is to improve the quality of life of the individual. So the basic idea here is that we want to fundamentally help people who have problems and needs. In part of my definition, it's implicit that the person acknowledges that they have problems and needs. The person who fails to acknowledge they have problems and needs, I guess, really doesn't have any problems and needs because they haven't acknowledged them yet. The point that Scow and Nurbin make is a pervasive one as well, which is to say that mostly what we do in hearing is to work with quality of life issues. And we'll see some articles that deal with the notion of measurement of quality of life even as part of what we do. So if we had to think of what the primary outcome of oral rehab is, successful oral rehab, it's fundamentally to minimize the consequences of hearing loss. And we can break that down in a couple of different ways here. So in very specific sort of contemporary terms, one of the outcomes of successful oral rehabilitation is to reduce hearing-related disability, to reduce the difficulties that are associated with hearing loss, and to reduce those problems that are imposed by the organic condition, meaning their physical impairment that their hearing loss has. Additionally, outcomes of successful oral rehabilitation are to improve and increase an individual's conversational fluency and their communicative effectiveness. Classic oral rehab language defines increased conversational fluency and communicative effectiveness as communication function. On that point, we will adjourn to screencast number 2.